And here we go. Okay. Tell me if you can see me.
I see you.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get a sound check from our attendees. If Andre and Christy, you guys are the first ones that show up. If you can, just tell me that you can hear us okay by popping into the chat and giving me the all is good, then we will get started. And also, you guys, just awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it. All right, you guys, remember that we have an opportunity here today with Dr. Maya. So use your Q&A box, use the chat box. I will be fielding your questions. We're going to have an organic conversation about this CBD and THC and all that good stuff today. But I want to give a proper introduction to Dr. Maya because she so deserves one. And so Dr. Maya is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child. I know that book's going to fly off the shelves after today, which is translated into 10 languages. She's been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, and The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya Shetty-Klein is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches terrain medicine and School of Sacred, earth-based programs for transformational healing of all living organisms. Now, Christy Etheridge is on, and I know she's going to blow up over that. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers in Ecuador and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Plant medicine and the sacred. And so I'm so excited to have you today, kind of selfishly, because I'm super excited about this topic, but also because this is such a great topic moving into the health coaching and wellness sphere and into our world today. I mean, it's being sold down at our natural grocery store. So thank you so much for being with us. Let's jump right into it. Huh? All right. So talk about, what is CBD oil? Tell us what it is. Let's just start with the basics.
Okay. So basically, I think like we all know that CBD is a component of cannabis. And so starting from there, I'm going to talk a little bit, I think, for a minute about cannabis and kind of what CBD is so that we can dispel any kind of ideas or misconceptions about the differences or similarities. So cannabis is, obviously we know, a plant, marijuana, which has both CBD and THC, as well as several other kinds of phytonutrients and phytochemicals that have various kinds of properties. And THC is psychoactive, whereas CBD, which is kind of a whole spectrum of different kinds of chemicals, has other kinds of activities in the body and stimulate all different kinds of receptors in different cells, but is not psychoactive. And CBD is something that we can find in other kinds of plants, and hemp is really the primary one that's being used as a source for CBD, even though it's not as potent, because hemp just doesn't have as potent those kinds of chemicals. It doesn't have as high a concentration. So CBD oil is a purified oil which has no THC in it at all, so no psychoactive properties, and just has this bioactive substance which has many different physiologic effects in the body.
Okay, good explanation. All right, so let's talk about the endocannabinoid system. Why do I struggle to say that word, endocannabinoid system, and why it's so important in the body? Let's talk, can you define that? Also, because we do have people that are brand new to this whole topic. So let's just keep it as simple as we can with explanation.
Definitely. So the endocannabinoid system is basically, it's like it's a few things. It's like the global protection system of the body. So it modulates a sense of safety for the body. Okay. And when our endocannabinoid system, which we can call the ECS if we're feeling insecure about saying that word.
Yes.
But if we have a sort of well-equipped and well-stimulated and well-maintained endocannabinoid system, it helps our bodies to feel safe and in balance. So it maintains most importantly, our sense of homeostasis, or our sense of being in balance, not too much of anything.
Okay.
And this is a really beautiful thing about plants in general, and the way that our relationship with plants is that when it comes to drugs or pharmaceuticals, it's typically trying to make our bodies go in one direction or another. So either trying to suppress something, it's trying to stimulate something. But when it comes to most kinds of herbal medicine or plant medicine, the beauty of it is it's really about bringing us, into balance, and not necessarily pushing us in one direction or the other direction. And that's like a pretty mind-blowing thing.
Yes.
That we do not get in kind of any of our knowledge about health or in medicine or in pharmaceuticals. But this is what plant medicine offers. And this is actually what the endocannabinoid system modulates, is balance.
Okay. So it's helping our body find a place of homeostasis is what it's trying to do. Finding the happy place that all of our bodies instinctively know where it is, but we tend to do things in our lives that push us in one direction or the other, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So when I saw the word endocannabinoid system, ECS, I automatically shifted my mind into something that I've studied for years, which is the endocrine system. So for the endocrine system, I know that, you've got the thyroid and you've got the HPA axis and you've got all of those things into play. What is what is involved in the endocannabinoid system?
So the endocannabinoid system is kind of like, it's pretty beautiful in the sense that it's not just limited to the endocrine system. It's not just limited to organs. It's basically a system that contains a few different components. Receptors, okay, which live on cells throughout the body to receive these endocannabinoids, and cannabinoids in general. Some of them we produce in our own body. Some of them we can get from plants, okay, like phytochemicals. And then the third component of this system is enzymes that break down the cannabinoids when kind of we're done using them. So those are the three components of the system. And we have these different receptors. The most kind of well-known so far are CB1 and CB2. CB1 is mostly in the nervous system, but it's elsewhere too. Okay. CB2 is mostly throughout the whole body, especially the immune system, but also it's in the nervous system and elsewhere. So nothing is totally sequestered from anything else. But basically, it's on cells throughout the entire body. And that's why basically we can experience sense of well-being, a sense of safety, and a sense of balance, because there's no way, if it was just in the brain, or if it was just in the immune system, or was just in the gut, that we could really experience the kind of full body effects that are incredibly far-reaching that we get from this.
Okay, so it kind of using the key and the lock and the whole analogy is that the receptors for people who are kind of like, what in the world does that mean? The receptor is basically a hole, and the cannabinoid is a key. Kind of, it's entering those systems throughout our body. Those receptors through our bodies are little keyholes. Is that right?
Basically, I would almost think of it as like open arms on the cell membrane. On the outside of this cell, there's just these open arms waiting to catch something. And the only thing they can catch are these cannabinoids. And so, can kind of grab them and hug them. And sometimes there are, more of them, more arms waiting to catch things. And sometimes there are not very many at all. But that's basically, lock and key, or, or whatever you want to call it. Receptors basically catch these substances, and they're unique. They catch only particular kind of substance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we know that there are things that can block, like the thyroid receptor, for instance, like fluoride, right? We know that if we have too much fluoride, that can block the thyroid from receiving thyroid hormone, things like that. Is there anything that actually blocks the ECS? Is there anything like that?
Well, there's a lot of issues that you can have with it, in terms of having a deficiency. And there are definitely different kinds of pharmaceuticals that actually there are pharmaceuticals that were designed to block that receptor. And I think they did not realize what would happen, which is that it caused people to feel fearful and anxious and depressed and even suicidal. There was, I think the medication that the drug that they had developed was called like rimonabant or something like that. And so there are things that can block it. And I'm sure there are toxins, different kinds of toxins as well. Mm-hmm. But so, you know, obviously taking good care of your body, eating clean, avoiding, you know, toxins. And then pharmaceuticals definitely interfere with the endocannabinoid system. And that's something we know.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the components of cannabis. And let's talk about what it does. Like, what are some of the components of cannabis and what do they do in the body?
Well, so the big components, the major components, I would say, are CBD and THC.
Okay.
And, you know, something to know as far as that goes is like today's cannabis is much higher in THC than it was in the past. So it used to be like it might be under 10%, but some strains now are greater than 30% THC.
Wow.
Which is, yeah, so it's really, really potent. Now, high THC is something that you may want if you want the immune system to work harder.
Okay.
And in those cases, like it might be for cancer treatment,
mm-hmm.
for like a very severe infection,
okay,
you know, that kind of thing. And most strains that you would just find, you know, available are low in CBD because people were looking for a higher high. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like, and that actually can cause more anxiety because CBD helps actually to modulate or alter or kind of reduce the anxiety that people can experience from high THC.
Okay, that does explain it because, I mean, obviously back in the college days, you know, I mean, I don't know anybody that really didn't experiment with it. But I do remember having a friend that was like severely anxious. Mm-hmm. And she would not, like when she would, you know, smoke pot or whatever, she would get super bad anxiety. And so she would just stay away from it. So that really makes sense. That means that there was low CBD. Is that correct?
Right. Well, some people have even a more intense reaction to THC than others do. And that has to do with their receptors, you know, like what their predominant receptors are, how effective their enzymes are to break it down, all of those things. But absolutely, it sounds like this was a person who was very sensitive to THC.
Yeah, she was sensitive anyway. Just a sensitive person in general had, you know, anxiety issues also. Okay. All right. So what medical conditions and problems, you've already mentioned cancer for the THC, but what can CBD oil be good for?
So I use CBD quite a bit in my practice. So I'm a pediatric neurologist. I see adults and children though. And so I think one of the big ones is seizures. Mm-hmm. That's you know, for epilepsy, pain, so mm-hmm. pain, chronic pain, autism is another one, depression, anxiety, so all of those, and things like chronic motion sickness, migraines, and even gut-related things. So there's also the other thing I didn't mention is that, you know, a big way that the endocannabinoid system kind of works is through the autonomic nervous system. And for those who don't know, the autonomic nervous system has, you know, our sympathetic or fight or flight mm-hmm. response and kind of like modulates that. And on the other side, also is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. So, and that parasympathetic nervous system, a lot of people don't know that it's not just about kind of rest and digest. It actually modulates inflammation in a second-to-second way, in the same way that it modulates breathing and respiratory rate, heart rate, and all of those things. So that's one big way that it actually affects all of these things I'm talking about, including the gut. So I've seen people who have done really well with Crohn's and colitis and like IBS as well, using CBD oil.
Okay. Yeah. And I started using it, it's been over a year ago. I was having chronic joint pain. I have Hashimoto's autoimmunity. And so when there is any kind of a flare up for me, or if I've gotten gluten in my system somehow, through, by accident, I will have joint pain. It's very definitive. CBD oil has literally almost knocked all of that out. It was amazing. And I definitely started with the tincture under the tongue and all of that. I started low and slow and things like that. What is your preferred method of delivery for CBD oil?
I mean, for me, what I use mostly with my patients is oil under the tongue.
Okay. Yeah. And what carrier does it come in? Does it come in a carrier oil, or what brand is it?
Typically olive oil. I've used a few different brands, like I don't want to like advertise a particular brand per se, because I think there's pluses and minuses to many different ones. And right now there's so many kind of becoming available that like literally every month there's some new product. But I mean, we can talk if you want about products that are like how to ask questions about products so that you're getting something good, and to know really, because especially now that it's been legalized in some places, especially for medicinal, there's like producers that are basically, doing their own growing or connecting to their own growers, producing it in their own way, and their concerns about how it's grown, how it's harvested, how it's being synthesized. And, so I think that's a really important component of selecting a product.
Yeah. So give us some tips on that. What would you look for?
Well, so for one thing, you want to know about pesticide use. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the grower, if you're getting it from a dispensary, or a grower for that matter, you always want to ask about the practices for growing. You want to know about pesticides. You want to know about organic versus synthetic fertilizers. You want to know if it's been grown indoors or outdoor.
Okay.
And it really matters, because the thing about plants is that, we kind of, I think of the plant as being uniform, like, oh, well, it's going to be the same. It's like, this is CBD oil. We're getting it from whether it's hemp or whether it's cannabis, whatever it might be. And plants are different. They're just like us, okay, in the sense that they are incredibly complex. They've evolved over, thousands of and more years, more than how long we've been around, right?
Right.
Many, 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 many times more. So we're talking, basically forever that plants have been around. And so they're very complex, and they adapt to their environment as much as we adapt to our environment. And when a plant is under stress, it actually makes the plant some stress, but not too much stress. It makes the plant a healthier plant. And what happens is, like, if there's some UV radiation from sunlight, for instance, it causes the plant to produce more of the CBD. It produces more of these phytochemicals that we actually are looking for, because that stress basically mobilizes the plant's immune system.
Oh.
And CBD and THC are components of the plant's immune system that just happen to be beneficial for us or affect us in whatever way. So a plant grown outdoors, or a plant grown without synthetic components like fertilizers or pesticides, is actually going to be probably a more balanced plant, a more potent plant, and obviously is less likely to have certain traces of toxins that we don't want.
Right. Yeah, totally. Isn't that interesting how the more stress that we are under as people, the sicker we get, but a plant actually becomes stronger from stress, right?
Well, it's not actually true. Like there's this whole concept. I mean, so yes, for plants, that's true. Some stress, not too much stress.
Gotcha.
And that's actually true in our bodies too. There's this
True.
concept, right, of hormesis, where
Yes.
a little bit of stress seems to like make our cells, our mitochondria, our whole system really step up. And too much obviously is definitely not a good thing. So really, if you want to know, these phytonutrients that we're talking about, CBD, THC, and like whatever the kind of phytonutrients we find in food, even,
Right.
what we call antioxidants,
Right.
are really all slightly toxic to our cells. And they actually cause our mitochondria in our cells to like step up and be a little stronger and function more optimally. So it's
So
sort of,
we're like plants then.
we're like plants and plants are like us.
That's so cool. All right. So one question that I've always had, and I mean, I'm sure there's, the more mainstream this becomes, why is the FDA so concerned about CBD oil? Like, what is the big deal about it? And I know we can talk about any supplement and throw this question in there, but this in particular, because of the stigma around, THC and marijuana and all of that, is that part of it? Is that they don't understand what CBD oil is, or?
No, it's not. I don't think that they don't understand. I think they understand too well.
Okay.
Is that plants are really powerful, and they're available to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, I think we could talk about this in a lot of layers, but ultimately, what it is, I think, is they want to control. They want to control kind of health, and they want to control kind of what's available to people, and make people feel like they can't help themselves. If you understand how to use, I want to say, even a handful of plants,
right,
then that's going to eliminate your need for most pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Something like cannabis, which is beyond the issue of it, potentially being mind altering and things like that. It offers widespread benefit. I mean, it's like almost every medical issue you can think of, there could be benefit. And that's not going to be true for every person, because there's a lot of factors, and some people don't respond as well to cannabis or CBD as others. And sometimes that's just kind of like you have to try different strains and all of that, which we could talk about a little bit. But what it comes down to is, I think that the FDA wants to control the process, and they want to make money. And only now that sort of it's been legalized and it's being controlled, now they feel like, okay, we're going to create some possibility that people can have access to it, but only in a way that's going to make money for pharmaceuticals, really.
Right. So it's like any other supplement. I mean, if they're having to say that they're not regulated, or them having to put it on the label and so on. I mean, it's really anything. Go to any supplement store and you can pick up a bottle and see, not regulated by the FDA, or, I mean, warning labels and things like that. It's mind blowing, but it has been one of the questions that comes up quite a bit. Even as we were promoting and talking about this webinar, people are like, we've seen comments come through. Oh, I won't be using that. I'm not interested because I don't do anything illegal. And I'm like, that's not it. You need to come so you can understand the difference. Yeah.
Well, right. And I think it's really, really important to know that, so CBD oil that you buy from hemp is totally legal. As far as I'm aware, I mean, you can double check, but it's totally legal in all states. It can cross state lines. There's no issue. It's from hemp, although there are cases like let's say the case of Charlotte's Web, which is a strain of actually cannabis that is very, very low in THC, very, very high in CBD, because it was, basically developed that way. That actually is able to be sold online and is considered legal. So CBD oil is totally legal if it's coming from hemp or a non-cannabis substance for sure. Then there's states where medical cannabis is allowed, or even recreational cannabis is allowed. In those states, it's legal, obviously, to use it. If it's recreational, obviously, for any reason. If it's medicinal, or you can use it for medical, then you need to have a prescription. It used to be, I know that Congress actually passed a law saying that it could cross state lines and it wouldn't be considered a federal offense. But I believe that was actually vetoed. So it's still an issue to travel with medical cannabis if it is cannabis. But CBD oil is fine. And I have patients who travel with it all over, airports, whatever, never have a problem.
Okay. So, but people using cannabis, and have a medical card, they can't cross state lines with it then. It's not to say, I think when it's medical and they have an actual license or prescription, I don't think it's an issue. Okay.
But for other reasons, it's going to be more difficult.
Right. So obviously, just to be clear, if you live in Colorado and you fly to Tennessee and you get caught with cannabis, it's not going to be legal in Tennessee, even though it's legal in Colorado if you're using it recreationally. Is kind of to clear that up. So what are your thoughts about using THC recreationally? I mean, is that something that, what's your opinion on it as a doctor, a neurologist for sure? Because, we know that it alters our minds but we've also seen I saw a video the other day about a woman's son who, had 100 seizures a day. And the only thing that has brought him back to be somewhat normal is THC, is the THC component of whatever they were giving him. I can't remember if it was a drop or what, but what are your thoughts about that?
Well, okay. So, that's sort of, I feel like, a few different questions, because I think that, if we're talking about from a recreational standpoint, or we're talking from a medicinal standpoint, I think it differs. And I think that brings us into the topic of like addiction and things like that.
Yes.
I think we should I think we can talk about that. I think it's useful to talk about it, because I think that while marijuana is not technically addictive, I think a lot of people rely on it more than I really ever, like, the more I kind of know and the more I look into it, the more I understand that many, many people utilize it, daily, as a way to kind of get through life, And I think, like, from my point of view, and maybe this is a little more spiritual than medical, but that's how I roll.
Totally. Okay.
Is that, if we're doing something that's clouding our judgment in some way, or we're, we don't want to face things in our lives that make us feel very uncomfortable, and we're relying on, whatever it might be to kind of ignore those things or put those things aside, I think that can be an issue. And I think it's important to kind of face those things in whatever way possible. That said, I don't necessarily think it's a problem, to have that mind-altering effect occasionally. I don't think it's a problem. And what I will say is, in the states where cannabis has been legalized, the rates of death from addiction have dropped significantly. That was published. It was written about in the New York Times. I mean, it's like that's a serious benefit, right? I mean, to think about how this plant can really help people to not be maybe using opioids, that might not need to go to the things like heroin or meth or whatever it is. So to me, I feel like I'd much rather have someone using cannabis.
Yeah.
That's thing one. In regards to THC from a medicinal standpoint, it has benefit. I mean, it does, CBD alone can be helpful for seizures, but for some people, CBD plus THC is that magic combo. And what I'll say about everything I know about plants and plant medicine is that plants are just as we are. We do not want to be like one component. Like we wouldn't want someone to be like, gosh, I love your nose, I love your face, or I love your butt, or something like that. Like you're like, hey, I'm a whole person.
Right.
The plant also is like a whole kind of, it's a whole. It's just like a component. And so my experience with plants is using the whole plant. And maybe one strain agrees with someone more than another, but using the whole plant is always going to function in a more holistic way in the body. It's just knowing, do you want more CBD? Do you want, more THC, et cetera, and interacting with it and really honoring it as a another being that is like a medicine. It's a medicine plant,
Right. Okay. So that leads me to this question, because I've heard, obviously I'm in Tennessee, and legalization is probably way down the road on that one. But I have heard that they are making strains in states that are legal that are specifically for specific conditions, right? So if you suffer from migraines, you get this strain. If you suffer from depression or anxiety, you could try this strain. How do they do that? How do they determine that?
Well, it's actually through the terpenes that kind of determine. So terpenes are another component of the plant.
Okay.
And that is actually like various terpenes influence us differently. And so I don't know that I think they're trying to do this, and they're finding, yes, like for, most migraine sufferers, this array of phytochemicals seems to, have the most impact. It's the same thing if you want to like kind of compare it. I don't know how much you know about like psychobiotics, right?
Not very much.
So there's this whole, from a kind of this is another angle, but like probiotics are now being used strain by strain that impacts mood.
Right.
And literally, like pharmaceutical companies are now developing particular strains that are going to help with anxiety, are going to help with depression, are going to help with bipolar. And they're probiotics that are being used as pharmaceuticals that are kind of next generation antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's unbelievable. So there are really ways, like in theory, about working with nature, right? And how kind of, in a sense, I would say partnering, right, with plants, partnering with microbes, all these different things in order to kind of influence our bodies and find what parts of us are out of balance, essentially.
Right.
And to help kind of re-regulate that.
Okay. So that leads to, let's go to a couple of questions here. So Maria's asking what strains could be considered for Parkinson's disease?
Well, Parkinson's, I would say, so I don't treat Parkinson's myself, because I tend to see younger people for neurologic issues. So I feel like that might not be something I'm going to be able to answer as directly, because I'm working more with younger people. Okay.
So Christy's asking, it depends on what the client, it depends on what the client would have wrong. You would, it's kind of incomplete, but would you theoretically on how you would start? So it depends on what's wrong with them, on how you would start them, on what kind of CBD oil, how much, and that kind of thing, like high milligrams. Would you start low and just stress that this is an instant notice in healing? Like, how do you begin with something like that?
Well, I think it first of all depends on if someone is on medications.
Okay.
So, what we need to know is that there can be significant drug interactions. So like THC, for instance, induces certain liver enzymes that therefore can decrease concentrations of like antipsychotics.
Okay.
If someone has psychosis, and particularly if they're on medication for psychosis, you want to be really cautious about using THC. just as an example. Another example would be like from the point of view of like CBD, it actually inhibits certain liver enzymes. So it can actually increase certain antibiotics like calcium, also calcium channel blockers, benzodiazepines, histamines, so certain cholesterol lowering medications. So that's another thing that to think about. And also it can impact things like antidepressants, antipsychotics, and opioids, like, you know, or oxycodone. So it's really, really important if someone's on medication to be very cautious about, and when I say cautious, I mean work with a medical professional to, you know, basically head off any kind of like significant interaction, because pharmaceuticals, you know, when they're not metabolized in the way that it's anticipated, can, you know, send everything, you know, kind of wacky, and you don't want to really put someone in danger that way. Not to say in certain liver enzymes, I see someone saying, does it decrease liver enzymes? It's not that it decreases them. It actually makes certain liver enzymes more active and other liver enzymes less active. So it can block the action of some and stimulate the action of others. And so that might lower a dose of medication that someone needs, or it might increase, you know, the medication because they can't break it down.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does it work on depression? Like, how is it? I mean, you know, we hear a lot of people that are, I mean, on depressed, they're depressed, or they're, you know, anxious, or they're taking medication for those things. You know, would there be a way for someone to be able to use CBD oil to maybe wean themselves off? And this is just a general question. I'm not on them. I'm not asking for anyone in particular, but I do know that, you know, that I've heard that people are like, I really would like to try this for depression, but I'm taking an antidepressant. How can I move into a more natural form of, you know, caring for myself like that?
So I think that, you know, my approach whenever I'm working with any person, obviously, you know, I'll just say, I mean, I'm working, I think, with like, you know, my practice is all these very sensitive. You were saying, you know, your college roommate or whatever is very, very sensitive. I mean, that's my entire practice, is basically like children and adults. I see probably like 75% kids and 25% adults that are very sensitive, and they're kind of like canaries in the coal mine, and they perceive things in a way that's more intense than other people perceive them. So that's how I would kind of say, like, the kids in my practice who have seizures or who have autism or who have whatever. And I see kids from all over the world with these kinds of issues, or ADD, you know, is another one. And I'm less likely to run to use CBD for someone who has ADD, but it could happen, you know. Aggressive behavior is another one, right? Like the idea is that going low and slow is my approach. And that is true, honestly, with any kind of herbal medicine I use. I always want to use as little as possible to get the desired effect.
Right.
So I never go to some dose I have in my head. Never.
Yeah.
I start with like a very small amount, which I believe with both kids and adults, if you have to use massive, massive amounts, then you're using it like a drug, you know, and that's okay as long as you know you're doing that. But with plants, really, you can sometimes see an incredible benefit at a very low dose. So I tend, even though it's studied in milligrams, you know, and we all want to kind of be like, well, how many milligrams? My experience is like, if I'm using CBD from hemp, it's going to be less potent. Whereas if I'm using CBD oil, you know, I'm not using it. But if I see that someone's using, you know, actually medical cannabis, then, you know, it could be literally one drop, you know, that could be enough to get things changed, you know, and create a shift. One drop, you know, then one drop. It might be one drop every other day, one drop, you know, maybe after a week, one drop once a day. Then I might go to one drop twice a day if I'm using something that potent. Whereas
Right.
if I'm using something less potent, I might start with 3 drops once a day, going to 3 drops twice a day, and then go up from there slowly and gradually. And really, it's a team effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a relationship between the person who's ingesting it, the plant, and you as a person who might be recommending it, and everybody having an awareness, and nobody having, oh, I need to get to like 30 drops or 50 drops 3 times a day, but like stopping every once in a while in this titration. I might say like a goal could be to get to 30 drops 3 times a day of CBD oil. That might be like a dose I would use in someone, but like if they start to feel better, and I see this often, if they start to feel better at 7 drops 3 times a day, but then when they get to 13 drops 3 times a day, suddenly they're not feeling good anymore. Okay, we found your sweet spot and it's not over 13. We have to go down. Or we want to try, something else, a different product, a different strain, a different mode of delivery. I've used it in creams, actually, on the skin.
Mm. I have some of that for massage. I use it for massaging like my kids' legs and stuff after soccer. And yeah, I've got some of that downstairs. And my mom is actually on here, and she and I got it. We both got some of that CBD cream for massage. So yeah, I've used it topically as well. So, okay, so let's go. We've got a couple more questions here in the Q&A, and then I'm going to kind of scroll through the chat. But Stacy's asking one of the questions I had written down to ask you, and that is, can CBD oil cause a positive urine drug screen? And if so, how would a person contest that? Well, how would they contest that would be up to them, but can it cause a positive drug screen?
It shouldn't if it's not from cannabis, but that's a good question, which I don't think it's the case, but what I'll do is I'll double check. And so I'll send it to you, and then you can kind of send that out to people after the chat. Yeah, I'll make a note to myself to double check that for people, because it's just like, it's funny that's never actually come up. I don't think CBD oil will do that though, but I'm going to confirm it and I'll let everybody know.
That would be great, because I know there's a lot of people that could benefit from this, or firemen and police. I mean, people that are on our law enforcement, because they're active and they're stressed a lot. I mean, you'd hate for something like that to happen. And
of course.
Okay, so Deborah's asking, how would one go about obtaining CBD oil? I'll just personally answer that I have a product that I use, and if Dawn's on here, she can share the link. If not, I'll send it out in the replay so you guys can check it out. And Shannon's saying CBD oil has been said to have 0.3% THC in it. Is this all CBD oil or just from cannabis plants? And is this enough to build up in the system at some point that it would show up on a test?
So the answer is that a good CBD product is not really going to have a detectable amount of THC, no matter how often you use it. And it doesn't build up. If you had some very disrupted, even if you were using an oil that had both CBD and THC, your body is breaking down that THC all the time. Mm-hmm. So no, it shouldn't build up in any particular way unless you're using an excessive amount of it and it has a lot of THC. You would not expect to see that.
Right. Okay. And I'm just kind of scrolling through. We've answered quite a few of these about like opioids blocking the ECS and what are the contraindications for CBD. So Evelyn's asking a legal question here. You may or may not know this, but she said, could I still get in trouble with federal law even though it's legal in my state?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The answer is yes. Mainly it's, and this is like our schizophrenic country right now, where they can't decide sort of what to do. And there's a lot of factors and a lot of political and financial and all kinds of factors that are coming into it. Even I know someone whose husband works in the in the DEA, and they're worried about like Mexican drug lords coming up here. I mean, this just like the complexities of this are like beyond.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, The answer is, if you are traveling with something and crossing state lines, it is possible that you could get into some kind of federal trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's not likely, okay? But it is possible. So that, I think you have to just be cautious. I mean, I have like just straight up CBD, you should have no problem with. But if it's coming from medical cannabis, if it's derived from cannabis, there's the possibility, unlikely as it is, that something could, catch someone's eye if you're unlucky,
Yeah. Okay. Second part of her question is, can it help with memory and mental sharpness, like for encephalitis or Alzheimer's? And let's stop right there for that question.
So it actually, I wouldn't call it something that's going to improve memory. But I do think that like the aspect of it that's around inflammation, right? So like if you're talking about someone who has a degenerative neurological disorder, there's a component of that has to do with, and I'll talk about a few different ways it can be helpful from a mechanism standpoint. One way is that it can reduce inflammation, inappropriate inflammation, which is part of the mechanism of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. Another way it's helpful is that it actually stimulates this process of autophagy, which basically is how cells get rid of all their garbage. Okay, so that's really important. And at the same time, it boosts something called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death for cells that are no longer working well. And that's something really important in cancer. It's really important when you have degenerative cells. You want those cells basically to auto-destruct and go away. The cells that you don't want, the cells that are sick. So the endocannabinoid system, when it's stimulated, is basically doing all of these things. And for that reason, it can be helpful in things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Not necessarily, though, because it promotes memory. And I think if you know people who maybe do, use a lot of cannabis, memory is not necessarily going to be sharper in those people.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there can't be benefits in someone who has a disease process.
Right. Okay. That's a good explanation. Okay. Let's see here. Is there a genetic contraindication for CBD? That's something I was going to ask earlier too about, DNA, doing these 23andMe tests and you find out you have a specific enzyme for like DAO for histamines or something like that. Is there anything like that for CBD?
Well, again, I think we're still learning a lot about that. But one of the big ones is like when we have, if we have impaired detoxification mechanisms, and that can be a lot of different possibilities, I wouldn't say, if you have like a glutathione impairment, that means you can't use CBD. It's not, there's nothing that I think I'm aware of that's that direct. But definitely for those people who have like mutations in their liver enzymes, that can be a real issue because of what we were talking about before. Basically, clearing it out of the body is a really important part of tolerating it. And for people who are sensitive, I'll just say from my point of view, the people who are slow metabolizers, we know that there's phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, right?
Right.
And, the test I like to use for people is the caffeine test, even though it's just one quick and dirty way to do it is if you're the person who drinks coffee at noon and you're still up with your heart racing at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you're a slow metabolizer.
Right.
If you drink coffee right before bed, that's an example of someone who could be a fast metabolizer. You go drink it right before to bed and you go straight to sleep. So for those people who are slow metabolizers, and that means usually that they have liver enzymes that are, impaired or slow, then those people are likely to have more problems versus the other way around.
Yeah, that's good. That makes good sense. I have a friend that she gets in bed every night with a book and a cup of coffee, and it blows my mind. I just can't even imagine. I wouldn't even want to put that thought of waking myself up in my head by smelling coffee at night. But Okay, so Evelyn's saying, Dr. Amen says, brain scans show there is a negative effect of cannabis on the brain. Can you speak to this?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what Dr. Amen found.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
haven't heard that.
I think, I would need to know if that study was using oil, if it was using CBD oil, if it was people smoking marijuana, which I think is different. What components were they using? How much were they using? I do think it's possible that people who use, who use really are using cannabis, and not kind of in a mindful way and not, in kind of a careful way, it could be damaging, and this is something I talk about with a lot of different plants. And I think we're going to see this with cannabis too, is, if we talk about, let's say, the poppy plant, right? Which is sort of like the precursor of opium and opioids,
Yes.
or we talk about the coca plant, so I was like, in Ecuador, and I've been in Ecuador several times, and when I'm there, people chew coca leaves if we're going to altitude, because it actually really helps with altitude sickness. And someone told me before I went, don't be afraid to chew the coca leaf, or drink coca tea, because it will really help you. And I get very sensitive to altitude. It really helped me. And it really made me investigate, these different plants, even tobacco, right? It's a sacred plant. All these plants are powerful plants. We call them master plants. And there are, incredible benefits to them, but they all have to be worked with carefully. You have to develop a respect for them, develop a relationship with them, and be mindful and careful in that relationship, which means not abusing it. It means coming into it without kind of treating it as something that's there for you to use. So from like a kind of a spiritual perspective, but I think it translates into Dr. Amen's brain scans as well. It's always important that we treat these plants in kind of the sacred way that we're meant to interact with them. And use it, certainly using cannabis frequently and not in a careful way. I believe that those scans might have showed issues, but I don't think if it's being used in a careful way. And something else I want to add actually is, someone might have seizures, someone might have Parkinson's, someone might have Crohn's, whatever they may have. You can use or, employ something like CBD or even medical cannabis. It is not necessarily getting to the root cause of the problem, though.
Right.
So if that's all you're relying on, you might have benefit for a while, but it might not last. You might have not enough benefit. It might help a little bit, etc. The important thing is to be employing this plant perhaps at the same time that you're still in the process of making sure people are eating healthy, making sure they're sleeping, making sure they're drinking well, making sure they're getting outdoors into nature, all these different other components that are critical, looking for toxic exposures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and not just relying on this one plant to solve all of the problems magically, because that happens sometimes, but it may not last forever, even if it does.
Right. So basically, don't go through Wendy's drive-through popping CBD oil and then go out and party till 4 a.m. and smoke cigarettes and think you're going to be okay.
That would be an extreme example, yes.
Right? Yeah. A lot of people do like to, they like to think that a pill can undo all the damage that they're doing with their life. And I'm glad that you clarified that you got to get to, use an investigative approach to find out why these things are happening in the first place. Once you find that trigger, it can be a complement to what you're doing, right?
Yeah, or it can be a combination. Right? A combination of triggers as well. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Gay is saying, can you speak to dosage to get a little bit? We've already kind of covered that as far as, she did, I think it's really instinct and paying attention to your body. And I'd like to just say this. I teach my coaches never to tell anyone how much of anything to take, because we're not prescriptive. We're not doctors. We are simply making a recommendation and a suggestion that this particular product, whether it be, CBD oil or whatever, may be something beneficial for you. We don't tell anyone to take or do or anything like that. So any health coaches that are on, just wanted to be really clear that by hosting this webinar, I'm not saying you should go tell your clients what to take. This is purely for education. So I just wanted to clarify that. And, let your clients know it's up to them to determine what dose they should be on and should be working with the doctor about that kind of thing. Okay, let me scroll through here a little bit. Is Charlotte's Web a company online? Yes, they are. They actually sell it at Tree of Life. That's my mom asking that question. Next time you come into town, we'll check it out. And then Evelyn is saying, is there a particular dose that you think might help calm down anxiety? Get sharper versus calm down anxiety.
Well,
that you've seen in your practice or an example of.
See, I actually think that calming down anxiety can also help people get sharper.
Yes.
So I think, again, it's really all about finding the sweet spot for that particular person, and not so much about some kind of prescriptive dose. And I know that, if I prescribed medical cannabis on a day-to-day basis versus, I use a lot more CBD oil in my practice. And although I have patients who use medical cannabis, technically, I don't prescribe it. So, and that has to do with New York state laws and things like that. But I definitely work with a lot of people who are using it. And my experience is, you're going to want to go more for CBD oil than you're going to want anything THC related if you're looking to treat anxiety, because THC without CBD can stimulate anxiety more. But I will say this, I've had patients who have gotten cannabis tincture, which is not the oil, so it's not extracted in the same way and it's not quite as potent, but they get it in an alcohol base or a glycerite base, which is sweet, and they use a few drops. And I've had patients with autism who are very anxious and can even be very explosive and aggressive, and they use that tincture under their tongue, and it's been incredible. And it's higher in THC, but it's not an oil. In their case, it's a tincture, and it's been quite helpful, and I've seen it in a lot of autistic patients be helpful.
Okay, so that might be something for oppositional defiance for those kids who just can't seem to reel in the explosive temper tantrums and the behavior when they're working with someone on all of the other areas, like working on IPEs or working with a psychiatrist or being put through a program. That's something to consider, right?
It definitely could be.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's see here. Let's just keep scrolling and make sure we answer everybody's questions. We've answered tons of, just in conversation, we've already answered most of these. Let's check back to the Q&A in just a moment, and then we're getting close on our time, and I know you're so generous to spend this much time for it with us. Evelyn's asking, how is it for chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, thyroid issues, mitochondrial dysfunction, et cetera? That's kind of that's a blanket question for any really autoimmunity. All of those things could probably benefit in some way.
Definitely possible to impact. Things like, what did we say? So autoimmunity, for sure, can be helpful. That's those, kind of CB2 receptors that are modulating the immune system. So it can be definitely helpful there. What were the other ones?
She was mentioning thyroid issues, chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue. Those, those are all symptoms of a bigger issue. So what's causing those problems really is what like we were talking about a minute ago, find out why those things are happening. But what do you think about it?
Mitochondrial issues and chronic fatigue, actually, there's a lot of overlap there. And, what I would say is that, like, these components kind of are one aspect that can stimulate hormesis, which is how I work with mitochondrial issues. So I see a lot of people with mitochondrial issues in my practice. And part of what we want to do, but along with other things, right? Like, so I might, also employ saunas. I might also, for some people use I might use intermittent fasting. Right. There's a lot of different ways that I want to stimulate that hormesis effect, but using things like CBD can be helpful there. I think it really depends on the reason for the chronic fatigue, whether you're going to see an effect or not.
Right.
So if someone's highly, highly toxic, you may or may not see benefit. If they're very, very inflamed, you might see the benefit.
Right. Yeah. And always finding out why it's happening. Like, why are they sick? Why are the adrenals tired? Always getting to the bottom of the problem for sure. Okay. So I'm going to go up to the Q&A one more time, and we're going to take one last peek. Linda's asking, have you seen or used certain oils for mercury or heavy metal toxicity symptoms? Any kind of anything that you would recommend for that?
I have not used, in my own practice, I have not used CBD as a way of treating toxicity. It's just, I feel like I have a lot of tools to use for that, and CBD has not, made it on for me. So that's not what I use it for.
Okay. Carrie's asking, does it stimulate appetite? Does it make you hungry like THC does?
I haven't experienced that. No.
I haven't either. Yeah, I haven't noticed that either. And Christy's saying, how would you know if your liver was metabolizing slowly? Do you have
I mean, the caffeine one is one that I use. If like someone's really sensitive to caffeine, I feel like you have a good sense that, or if you're really sensitive to pharmaceuticals, right? I mean, these are just clues that your liver is going to be more sensitive. People who are highly toxic, for any number of reasons. So if that someone has high heavy metals, or someone has, I used to see a lot of kids who lived near an international airport in New York that had seizures. There's a whole bunch of kids that live near Kennedy Airport, and I would check them. I actually ended up checking their blood, and I found jet fuel byproducts in their blood.
Oh my gosh.
Well, let's say like I see people, with seizures, I'm not using it to detoxify them. If I'm using the CBD, it's to help mitigate the inflammation, the neuroinflammation, the kind of overexcitability that's going on in the brain, but it's not what I'm using for detoxification.
Got it. Good. That's terrible about the jet fuel. Awful. Okay. Carrie says, what about someone who is in cancer remission and wants to try to keep cancer cells at bay? And what about diabetic contraindications?
So I do think it's something interesting to use, as I've used it actually for a lot of post-chemo effects, and great. I've used it in kids. I've used it in adults. I'm fond of using it for like neuropathies, post-chemo neuropathies, for helping, it's not that it stimulates the appetite, but it helps balance, the appetite, I would say more. And it, because of the way it works with the immune system and what we were talking about before with apoptosis, that programmed cell death, I don't think that's a bad idea, actually. I mean, again, it's not going to replace the clean lifestyle. Yeah. But, it definitely can play a role.
Okay. So we need to get a couple more in here. And then I also want to make sure that we get a link to your book too, or I can just do that on Amazon, either way, whatever you want to do. But I definitely want your book out there. We've got a lot of moms and people online that would be interested in that. Shannon's saying that her son has traumatic anoxic brain injury from birth. They used CBD oil a few months successfully when they found out at age 14 until he started self-medicating with street cannabis. Do you use it in your practice for TBI? And how does that work?
I have used it for TBI more, again, to deal with the neuroinflammation that can come afterwards, or anxiety and kind of mood issues, depending on how severe the TBI is. But I don't, it depends. It depends on the person. So it's not like what I want to kind of clarify, maybe this is a good way for me to close, in fact, is, when I'm using this, and I know obviously we always want to have like a guide, like who can we use this in and so on, but it's really very individual. So, when we look at medical research, people become their disease, right? They become epilepsy, they become Parkinson's, they become chronic pain, they become chronic fatigue. But really, when I'm with a patient, I'm listening to their story, as I'm sure that, anyone here is doing when they're sitting with a client. And so it becomes clear based on what their experience is, whether they're a good candidate for this. So like, I wouldn't say I treat seizures with CBD, or I treat, or epilepsy, or I treat chronic pain. But if someone comes to me with epilepsy, or someone comes to me and they have chronic pain, or someone comes to me and they have a TBI, that is a tool that, I kind of have available in the toolbox. And I may recommend it depending on an array of different things. I might not go to that as my first option.
Right.
Because there's a lot of other options, and I use very few pharmaceuticals. So there's not very much I'm using that probably most of you can't use, in terms of plants, in terms of supplements and so on, but, or that you might, be aware of and you might, recommend, but what it comes down to is, I'm not using it for everybody. Like,
yeah. Yeah, there's so many other things. I mean, you're a neurologist. My gosh, I mean, the amount of things that you have in your toolbox it's got to be massive. It's probably just one of the benefits of CBD oil is that it calms things down. Really, I mean, it answers, the question by Nira, and a lot of the questions I kind of scrolled through is the answer is the same. It really just calms down inflammation, helps the body find that balance that you were talking about, no matter what the actual diagnosis is. Mm-hmm. And that is, and people asking about dosages and things like that. As Dr. Maya was saying, they need to be working with someone that knows their particular history and their story and what they're struggling with and dealing with that can adequately help them with dosages. So I'm going to just scroll to the last question because this one, this one always brings up Trudy Scott, because Trudy and I did an interview last year about GABA and 5-HTP and neurotransmitters and so on and so forth. And she actually talks a little bit too about like what you mentioned about the slow and fast metabolizers. She calls them pixie dust people who can only handle a tiny little drop of something and then they're overstimulated or something like that. So Is CBD oil compatible, when she says neurotransmitters like GABA, tryptophan, or 5-HTP, is there any contraindication between them?
So using them, like if you're giving giving it as like an amino in a supplement.
Yes. Like if someone's taking GABA for anxiety, which, can be very beneficial, can they take the CBD oil? Is there are there contraindications for the neurotransmitters like that?
Not necessarily, but again, like what it has to do with is, the strain, and how that person responds to it. So again, just using that low and slow approach, mm-hmm. And finding that sweet spot for them. But no, just as such, there's no contraindication to giving GABA and CBD at the same time.
Okay, perfect.
That I've experienced, certainly.
Okay, awesome. All right, I don't see any other questions here. I think that's probably going to be what we have time for today. And I just want to say that I thank you so much, because this is going to be coming up more and more and more. The more we work with people and the more they legalize across the states, of THC. Not only that, but I think it's been very helpful to help people understand the difference between, because so many people think that cannabis is CBD oil. They think THC is CBD oil. And you were very clear in describing, the difference between the two and how each one can be helpful in different situations. So I really appreciate your time so much. And I want to talk to you in the future and bring you back and talk about your whole bio about plants and Ecuador and all of that. That's so fascinating to me. And I don't think I'm ever going to be able to garden the same again after listening to you talk about plants today. I am one of those people that, like, if I see a bug in my house, I do not like to kill anything. I like to have it trapped and carry it outside. And I feel bad if my plants are like kind of wilty, but I'm really going to be paying more attention to just the idea of how similar we are to them because of you. So Thank you for that. So cool. All right. So where can we find your book?
So my books, I think everywhere, but definitely you can get it on Amazon. It's
okay.
Sure.
All right. And I'm going to put it out in the replay, but what is your website so we can tap it in here real quick?
Sure. It's Dr. Maya, DRMAYA.com.
Okay. Easy enough.
Yeah.
And you can find out more about Dr. Maya?
Yeah. Teaching people kind of how to employ like all of these approaches in terms of how to work with plants, and the dirt cure concepts about microbes and the microbiome and all of that stuff as well. So, people can find me also on Instagram. I post a lot of stuff there. Dr. Maya She Treat. Okay.
Now I know someone's going to ask me if you work with people remotely. Do you do remote work?
I do.
You do. Awesome. Because I think I see a couple of people on here that might be asking me that question after we're done. So, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Maya. Will I see you if we get to Mindshare this year? Are you going to be there this year?
Glad to be there. Yep.
All right. Well, I'll see you then, and I hope to talk to you before that. Thanks again.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having me.
everybody. Bye.